All right, welcome everyone. So I'm joined here with Dr. Simone Phipps, and we're bringing to you a session called Building Sustainable Ecosystems: Strategies for Inclusive Business Growth. And we're going to have a really good conversation with Professor Beril Toktay and Jay Bailey. And so we are so honored to be joined by these two phenomenal leaders within their space. You know, so So I'm going to ask Beryl to introduce herself to the audience and tell us about her work at Georgia Tech.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leon and Simone. It's really a delight to be here today. Beril Toktay, I'm in the Scheller College of Business at Georgia Tech, and I am the founding director of the Ray C. Anderson Center for Sustainable Business. This year, I'm also the Brook Bowers Institute Sustainable Systems interim director. This is an interdisciplinary research institute that reaches across campus to catalyze research connections. One of the things that we have done over the last year in the Ray C. Anderson Center for Sustainable Business, where our mission is to educate and empower the sustainable business leaders of the future, is to do research in the space of climate solutions and see what are climate solutions that would be the most effective in the state of Georgia in terms of drawing down carbon, but not just in terms of reducing emissions, but also improving economic opportunity, enhancing health outcomes, enhancing equitable and inclusive growth. Based on that research, we launched a compact, a business compact of companies that are committed to climate action. And today, this compact has almost 60 members. And I'm very delighted that it not only includes larger companies that are headquartered here or have operations here, but also small and medium-sized enterprises and minority-owned businesses. So I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk more, but in a nutshell, those are the things that I do at Georgia Tech. And thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And hey, everybody, Jay Bailey, President and CEO of the H.J. Russell Innovation Center for Entrepreneurs. This is the best job of my life. I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, but we have created in a very short time what is the largest center in the world dedicated to growing, scaling, and developing Black businesses in honor of one of the greatest entrepreneurs this city has ever produced, H.J. Russell Sr. Um, I'm just a firm believer that we lose GDP every year because the brilliant ideas that reside on the south side of the tracks of every city in America, maybe even the world for that matter, they never reach the marketplaces they don't believe they belong. And I think the only difference between that north side of the tracks and the south side of the tracks is access, opportunity, and exposure. And we want to live at that nexus of access, opportunity, exposure, and create spaces that give people a fair shot at opportunity. You know, you talk about innovation, but you're never going to find someone more innovative than a single mother with two kids making $17,000 a year. There's so much talent out there. And if we could create those safe spaces for them to fail and fly, we've done that here in a space that undergirds self esteem, self confidence, and belief and really focuses on the whole entrepreneur. In just a short time, we now support 360 entrepreneurs full time. We reach about 10,000 annually through our coordinated partners and community efforts. And we're far from done. And so, I think at the heart of what we do, our mission statement is simple: build Black business. And we have the perspective that the stabilization of communities, especially in a city like Atlanta, that's the worst city in the country when it comes to income inequality. It's the worst city in the country when it comes to economic immobility. One of the ways that we can do our part to change those statistics is to look at creating sustainable businesses that are here for generations. So really honored to dig into the conversation. Professor Toktay, like Georgia Tech has been one of our greatest partners going forward and has been. And so, no, thank you both. Thank all three of you for including us in the conversation.
Yeah, and in fact, we were on the Regional Innovation Ecosystem Grant together.
That is absolutely correct. One of the largest grants ever awarded in the state.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Amazing.
All right, so we'll just jump straight into questions. So, my first question will go to Professor Toktay. So, your extensive research in sustainable operations and supply chain management, it has been really informative to many stakeholders, be it practitioners, entrepreneurs, businesses worldwide. And we are well aware that innovation is a key driver for business growth. However, there's a challenge in really creating that innovation ecosystem that is sustainable, that contributes to the long-term success of businesses. So, Professor, could you share with us some key strategies that businesses can adopt to really foster a sustainable innovation ecosystem?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And I think my research mainly focuses on larger companies, larger brands that try to do things at scale. One of the areas that these companies are very effective at is setting up an R&D pipeline from that reaches into universities and that reaches into that technical know-how. So many of them have good processes and good connections. They have corporate innovation centers. We have great many examples around here at Georgia Tech. And so the more standard commercialization pipeline from discovery through the different stages of commercialization to market is something that there's a lot of expertise in. Where I feel that there is still room for growth is to do exactly what you said, which is create this innovation ecosystem, right? So who are the people from whom we would want to draw ideas about what are the products and services that are needed on the market to serve everybody's needs? What are the ways in which innovation processes or engagement processes need to be different to bring in different stakeholders at different stages of that process? So that's something where companies are still maturing and trying to figure things out. In terms of what are some of the strategies that can help, what I found is that taking expertise or know-how from other areas which are sometimes specialized and siloed in their own right. For example, many large companies do have community relations people. They do have government affairs people. They do have investments sometimes into K-12, right? They do have supplier development programs. But these kinds of programs tend to not necessarily touch and be incorporated into how that innovation pipeline and that innovation pipeline of activities happens inside the company. So the biggest opportunity and where I see the biggest successes when they do happen are for companies who are very intentional in integrating those different aspects of their business. There are some cases that we teach that are interesting in that regard. For example, we teach about cradle-to-cradle design and how it was incorporated at Herman Miller. Supplier engagement was a very sustained supplier engagement, and investing in your suppliers was a very important piece of that particular strategy. In terms of a company that is somewhat controversial, I'll bring up Walmart. Walmart used to be a very inward organization, but when they decided to take sustainability more seriously, the way that they organized around it was to create what they called sustainable value networks. And for the first time into those networks, they brought scientists, they brought NGOs, and they brought community members. And they created a structure where those voices and expertise could be pulled in. And they did do things in the end differently than they would have done otherwise had they not reached out to new constituencies. So in a nutshell, I would say it's really opening up the box of how the company engages in the commercialization and innovation process and invest very intentionally in creating an ecosystem of diverse backgrounds, geographic locations, capabilities, and integrates them.
Thank you for those insights. And I just love how you talk about investing in your suppliers, especially in a more inclusive way. So I'll segue to Simone to touch base with Jay Bailey.
Jay. Yes, thank you so much. Hello, everyone, again. And I, Professor Toktay, I really also heard what you said about engagement processes, and that really struck a chord with me because we know it's especially difficult, especially challenging a lot of times for small business owners and entrepreneurs who may be minorities to have the networks and to have the resources to not only start businesses but to also grow businesses. And so, Jay, I wanted to ask you how you think minority owned businesses can be better included and supported within a sustainable business ecosystem. You're on mute.
We talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. And one construct that I think we often leave out that's critical is belonging. When you approach an ecosystem strategy or an inclusive strategy as a requirement and not a strong case for bottom line business development, we all lose. So there's real authentic conversation companies must have about the role that diversity plays in their own ecosystem, in their bottom line, in their business model. You cannot see empowerment through a charity lens. And if it's seen as just doing something that is necessary, but not needed to conduct business, I think that we need to elevate the conversation in general about the role that diversity plays, inclusion plays in the overall profitability and productivity of companies. That's first. But I think that when you think about companies and having the ability to be competitive, one of the things that we really focus on is readiness. Most large corporations do not have the bandwidth to help companies get to a point of readiness to do business at the next level. It's where we've developed a supply chain accelerator within the Russell Center. We've had tremendous success in getting companies ready to do business at the next level with Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 organizations. That portion is critical because, as you just shared, Dr. Phipps, it was literally, where does a company understand the steps it takes, the bonding it takes, the insurance that it takes, the experience that it takes to do business with a Walmart or a Chase Bank or a Delta or a Coca-Cola. So I think increasingly why nonprofits, NGOs, programs, support networks, incubators, accelerators are needed is in that component of readiness, but access as well. So the fierce intentionality that it takes to actually move the needle is another part of that, though. It's even in our space, we try to walk the talk. If you look around my office from the watch that I'm wearing, where I got this vest, the water that I'm drinking, the AV that I'm speaking on now, our low voltage, our construction, our general contractor, almost 90% of every dollar we spend goes to a Black entrepreneur that we support. Our definition of ecosystem is that it is circular, that in the truest definition of an ecosystem, the things that that ecosystem needs, they're met. Those needs are met within that ecosystem. So we're able to give an opportunity to an organization to have their first commercial client. But we're also able to use that kind of leverage, that kind of experience to then say to a larger organization, here's their track record of success that we can stand on. We spend more with the companies we support. We spend more with Black companies than most Fortune 1000 organizations. Just in the past 18 months, we have $19 million of direct spend with Black companies that we support. And so it's really walking the talk. And I think that also it's a top-down strategy that must be adopted from the most senior levels of leadership throughout the culture of the community. And if we don't see that, it's really just an exercise. It's not a true development of a company strategy to grow the company, But as I shared with an organization that I spoke with yesterday, a Fortune 50 company, check the demographics. The world is changing. The world is becoming more diverse by the second. And if you're not able to adapt strategies to bring the world in as it is today and as it will be tomorrow, eventually you will find yourself obsolete. And so I think it's critical to every company's strategic planning to think about inclusivity, to think about diversity in real terms and not as something that you put over to the foundation or to an also ran department just because it's an exercise of utility.
Well, that was just powerful. That was just absolutely powerful. Go ahead, Simone.
It was definitely to follow up on what you said, because you mentioned belonging being a key ingredient to help to create inclusion and to support the minority-owned businesses. You mentioned that a lot of times readiness is a challenge and access. And so I just wanted to follow up in your opinion, what are some of the unique challenges? Because those things that you mentioned, those factors would be considered challenges. But I also want to know some more challenges as well that you think minority-owned businesses face when it comes to sustainability.
Oh, there's the long list. When you start talking, I'll lean in on access. When you're talking about access to capital, access to networks, access to the relationships, access to industry, access to mega trends and what's coming next and how do I see around the corner? Because I'm a firm believer, if I knew where the hockey puck was going, we could train the next Wayne Gretzky to score. And so these insights that are held very tightly by corporations don't allow for companies to expand and grow. And you know what I call, and some people may call it racism. I think in many cases it's radical indifference. Business moves at the speed of relationships. And literally in the space of, if I need a contractor, if I need to hire a supplier, I'm going to go with who I know. It's quick, it's done, and we're out of here. It takes time, it takes effort, and it costs money to expand that circle. So what I say oftentimes, where people are just saying those are racist policies, some of them are. But on the other hand, when you're talking about bottom line business, adherence to your stakeholders, looking at your stock price and the return on their investment, sometimes speed matters. And this is why my first statement was about intentionality and the authentic answer of why you're doing this. Because all of those challenges around access literally keep the circle very, very, very small. And so, if I were to think about minority businesses and where their greatest challenges are, the list that I just gave around access, but the opportunities that access would provide is the greatest challenge. When our work here at the Russell Center is not to guarantee that everybody gets a shot at a contract with a big company. Our promise to our stakeholders is that if you do, you're going to be ready. My job is to make sure that we create the platform to get companies ready to do business at the next level. And when we can certify that, giving them the access necessary to fly. And so I know we'll get into it in the conversation, but we've had a number of successes that literally apply that very simple equation of access and opportunity. And we've seen companies have 3,500 to 7,000% growth because of the readiness and the access they were given through the institution.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Right. Wonderful, wonderful. So Professor Toktay, we're curious to know from your perspective, how can investors and entrepreneurs really work together to ensure that sustainability is at the heart of their operations? So we always hear a lot of talk about the need for sustainable innovation, etc. But how can they really work together to ensure that sustainability is at the core?
Thank you. And by the way, please call me Beril.
Okay.
Very formal. Otherwise, okay. I'm going to respond by connecting what you said to what Jay said, because it is so true. This notion of access and opportunity. I mean, you see it in every walk of life. Even within Georgia Tech. Right, there's kind of the core of Georgia Tech, and then there's the other units. And so like the core of Georgia Tech is engineering. I'm in another unit, which is business. And normally it kind of operates on the side. And until and unless you are in the networks that are core to where all the connections are being made, where the main dollars are flowing, where the big decisions like going after this AIM grant that, Jay talked about are made, then you can't even see how the assets that you bring could contribute. You can't verbalize it. You can't bring it to the table. You can't make any pitches. And therefore, the organization loses out on what capabilities that you might bring to the table. So, it really resonates. So how do we, make this happen? Again, Jay said something about there's diversity and inclusion, and then it kind of tends to get siloed. How do you get it to the core? And I think one of the concepts that I've started thinking and talking and writing and trying to practice more and more is this notion of inclusive innovation. Again, when we are building out innovation ecosystems, how do we bring in different people and how do we get them to hear each other's perspectives and understand each other's assets? Others at Georgia Tech are also doing the same thing. I'll give one example. We have a sister institute called the Institute for Leadership and Social Impact. Terry Blum and Dory Papp are running it. Jay, you may be working closely with them, right? So the way that they used to do things, they had an ideas to serve competition, and they would invite students to develop ideas, pitch, et cetera, But over time, through their insights and input and other programs that we developed on campus, for example, Serve, Learn, Sustain, that brought the idea that the real good ideas are in the communities, and the students and the articulation of problems and needs are also in the communities. And the best thing that we can do for our students is to connect them to these communities, to the people who are immersed in the problem and thinking about it day and night, so that our students are not dreaming up of, issues to solve in a vacuum, which of course can only come mainly from their lived experiences or what they might Google and won't be deep and authentic. So that program has done a pivot over the last few years that, Dory and Terry talk at length, which is they have pivoted to making more of those student to social innovator NGO connections happen. And the kinds of things that they reward now is not necessarily the end product, but in their competition, there is like the best problem statement, like the best understanding of a particular context, best problem framing, right? So those are the skills that we are trying to, at Georgia Tech, impart in our students. But I think the principles apply to businesses as well. It applies to entrepreneurs as well. That to the extent that they don't think in silos and they think that they really have something to learn from the people who either need the products or have the insights, it's very important that both themselves, but also the structures that support that kind of innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem create opportunity for access and inclusion. So I really want to underline what Jay said. And so coming to your question of how can investors and entrepreneurs work together? Investors are looking for things that will find a market. So investors' incentives are inherently aligned with the identification of good ideas and being able to bring diverse talent to the solution of those problems. But the structures in which venture capital operates tends to focus definitely on the principle of who do I know, and there are very ingrained networks that are very hard for minoritized groups, and I will generally include female entrepreneurs too in this, of any race, to be part of that system and to thrive. I don't know what the answer is to the question of what is the big change that we could do as people who care about this in Atlanta that will kick the game to the next level in terms of expanding not only the network of connections, but also opening up the investment and entrepreneurship space, the investment space in particular, and the entrepreneurship space to minoritized groups. But the Russell Center is doing the good work, and we're trying to learn and bring some ideas to bear as well.
Good. Well, I have a quick follow-up. I see a question here from Elizabeth Sedgback. So her question is this. So it's one thing to talk about socially sustainable entrepreneurship, but how can already established companies shift towards more social sustainability? So she basically said it's difficult to move a big ship.
It is. It is. Intentionality, learning, listening, setting up formal structures, doing the culture work, leadership, learning and being able to give voice to it, but also enabling grassroots, even within a company, like pulling in people in different parts of the organization that have a passion for advancing these kinds of structures. It's a long process that can take years to complete for large companies, and all of those elements matter.
Good.
Jay may have additional insights on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I add, Beril, is desire. And I think that's one of the things that we just have to be honest about. The ship will not turn if there's not a captain at the wheel turning the wheel and saying that is the new direction that we're going in. And I think oftentimes, because of societal pressures, companies feel the need to kind of give performative statements about where they're going. But the pain of, like you said, Beril, earlier, those small circles expanding, there's real pain in having a small circle grow bigger. There are growing pains that are associated with that. And most people are not willing to do it. And I think that there's just the honest dialogue that we need to have as Americans, certainly as the American corporate community, about what is real and what is not. And I think for ingrained, established organizations, pull up any Fortune 1000 company and take a look at their executive board. Take a look at their executive team. And if it all looks one way, I'm going to tell you that more than likely that ship ain't going to turn, and somebody's actually going to be in a space to be siloed over for this thing that we must do to kind of quiet the noise. There are some companies that have a fierce intentionality around it, but I think that desire and a steadfastness to see change happen, it is required.
Mm-hmm.
And it is difficult to sustain too. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Continue.
Because, large companies often go through reorganization. CEO lifetimes are getting shorter and shorter. I'm not going to say fruit fly exactly, but, depending on which industry you're in, definitely the clock speed of industries anyway is ranges depending on whether we're talking about consumer products or larger technology companies. But that also makes it very difficult because, you get networks in place, people who believe in it, they're starting to come up with new ways of working together, new protocols, new everything. And then there's a reorg and, it all changes. So then if you're a small organization trying to do business with that company, it is a lot of hard labor. So nothing about it is particularly easy. So it really matters more the broader cultural context, so that whoever is at the helm of the company has that ethos. And in terms of the work that we do as an educational institution, I think that's so very important, that when our students come in here, they come in, many of them come in, they're idealistic, they want to change the world. And then what are we doing to make sure that they want to continue to change the world for the positive, or that if they hadn't been thinking about certain issues, that we open up their minds and expose them to perspectives and people and ways of doing business that they hadn't imagined even existed. So I just want to put in a plug for higher education and continuing education in that regard, because the broader cultural context and the general celebration of diversity and inclusion is what we really need for change.
Definitely. All very good points from both of you. We do need that desire. We need the right leader at the helm who actually cares. And of course, we need the formal policies in place to guide people towards that social sustainability. Before we talked about that question, Beril was talking about investing and the importance of investors in growing sustainable businesses. And I do know, Jay, that you are very affiliated with Greenwood Archer, which is a minority-owned private equity firm that's focused on investing in emerging domestic markets, urbanization, and affordable housing. And so I was wondering how you think that investors and other stakeholders as well, how do you think they can contribute to growth and sustainability of minority-owned businesses?
Yeah, I think that so many of the answers that we said before are the exact same answer. It takes a certain level of intentionality. I think about industries that we already have incredible examples. Like if I look at the NBA or the NFL or college football or the US Olympics team, none of them have any challenges finding minority talent. And literally, when you start talking about them being compelled to shift when they knew that they could not compete without being inclusive, everything changed. That's why the NBA is like 70+% Black. But literally less than 50 years ago, there was not a single Black player. And the Olympics, the same thing, that if we can't compete and win without being inclusive, then we're going to change everything. And I think that goes with investment as well. That if folks understood that, you can't deny the data. The fastest growing segment of startup organizations is Black women. It's by a yard. But they still get less than 1% of the capital that exists out in that space. So we're not talking about a rational argument or conversation that says, look at the data, look at the science, and let us funnel capital where the data tells us we should. That's not what's happening, because all the data supports that minority-run, minority-led organizations are the future of growth in any ecosystem, be it tech, be it consumer products, be it culture, be it community, be it education. And so if we're talking about an irrational kind of conversation about where capital flows, because it is not scientific, nor is it data-driven, we've got to now look at how do you create more inclusive capital sources that come from the communities where these entrepreneurs are. And I think that it's that age-old topic of, I'm not going to keep fighting for a seat at the table. Eventually, I'm going to make my own damn table, because literally I was never invited there. And if I was on the menu. And so this notion of how do you activate our church networks 20, 30, 40 years ago, the civil rights movement showed us this. Our church networks had tremendous capital resources that they poured into movements. There is capital in these communities. But how do we harness that capital? How do we re-educate the investor? How do we weaponize the person? Because the accredited investor kind of platform is one of those things that has traditionally kept the regular average Joe out of the opportunity to grow wealth at tremendous multiples, because you have to be accredited. Well, what about that person that could contribute $50 per month times 1 million people in this country could do the same? I just think that there's a new way to look at capital. I think there's a new way to look at capital strategy. I think there's a new way to look at how we think about investing in companies. You know, as we see the evolution of, you know, like crowdsource and crowdfunding, as we see the evolution of, you know, fintech and how that's exploding, we're going to start seeing sources of capital open up, which will be more inclusive, will be more objective, more subjective than objective. And I just think the market is going to demand the capital flow in a different way. It's hard for me to talk about the venture capital environment or the current investment community. It's a non-starter for me when they bring it up at the Russell Center, because yes, less than 1% of the capital goes to Black folks. So it's not a conversation that I need to have, because literally there is nowhere to go but up. And if the data supports that we should be going up and those numbers continue to go down, then those are conscious decisions being made by people that hold the capital. And there's nothing more simple than that. Conscious decisions are being made that, Leon, if you have a good idea, sorry, brother, I just don't get it. I don't see it. But if someone else that looks different from you had that exact same idea, you know, that is brilliant. That needs all the funding necessary to see it all the way through. And that happens. It's a real conversation that we have to have. Back to that radical indifference. The people that I see, the people that I trust, the people that I know, when I look across that table, do I see my daughter or my son? Or do I see somebody that I question their integrity or their ability or their acumen? So all of these things are in play. So I think the investor community is going to have to grow up and have a dramatic shift over the next 10 years. But I think that dramatic shift is going to come from bottom-up strategies that start to capitalize companies from the communities that they'll serve, rather than waiting from those at the top with all the capital currently to trickle it down.
I'm going to jump in here, if that's okay, and say,
Yeah,
if
please
not
do.
in Atlanta, if not in Atlanta, where? Right? Right now, Atlanta's history, obviously, and the depth of the networks and the insight and all that is tremendous. We're, I think, now a majority minority city, right? We are one of the best educated cities, with all the universities that we have and the tremendous network of HBCUs as well. So if Atlanta does not model inclusive capital, where? And I would love to follow up after this call. I'm so glad we're on the same webinar, to see how Scheller College of Business, the financial inclusion lab that was added, and fintech that we're doing, and all the stuff that we have could actually help you advance what you want to do, and vice versa.
That is an offer that I'll take. And thank you, Leon and Simone, for bringing us together. But it's real. I believe, without question, Atlanta has the opportunity to be the most consequential city of the next 100 years. I love my friends out in Silicon Valley. Got a lot of friends in Cambridge, got a lot of friends in the Research Triangle. Love what they're doing in Nashville, love what they're doing in Austin, love what they're doing in Miami. But none of them have made innovation inclusive. They just have not done it. And in Atlanta, to the point you made, Beril, that we've got the colleges, we've got this incredible congregation of corporations, we've got this culture, we've got this history where we literally have changed the world without firing a single shot before, birthed out of Atlanta. And I'm going to tell you, we're a lot cooler than most of these other cities that we have. We can go from Ambassador Andrew Young to Andre 3000 to Mayor Andre Dickens in one grocery store. The term Atlanta influences everything is real. So we've got that creative culture coming out of here that impacts the whole world. I was in South Africa and I was listening to 2 Chainz. I was in Israel and the person had on Outkast. And these are Atlanta organizations. So there's all of this energy that's bubbling up here, all of this economic energy, all of this cultural energy. And to your point, Beril, we have the population demographics to do something different. And that's the kind of distance that no other market can catch up with. Like
that's a real differentiator. I mean, we talk about comparative advantage when we talk about creating innovation ecosystems. And it is Atlanta's comparative advantage that we would be smart to lean into.
Google ain't wrong. Microsoft spent the money. Airbnb spent the money because they have seen and studied and have the data to support what both of us are saying.
But Jay, you said something really insightful, talking about a radical indifference. How do we combat this radical indifference? And I'll pose this question to Beril as well. Like, based on your experience and insights, how do we combat that and really help build this ecosystem that we truly want, that's inclusive?
Proximity.
Pass the buck to Jay.
We've seen it happen on this call, Leon. It's proximity and exposure. It's access. So Beril and I have never formally met or had a conversation, but because you put us in the same ecosystem, in the same square boxes, through our conversation, we've now been introduced to one another. She hears a bit about my pain points. I hear some of her strengths. And through this call, they'll probably develop a call after this where we talk about how we can go forward. Before this panel, Beril and I may have never communicated, ever, because of the silos that she talked about in her institution and the way things sometimes work. And what force of nature would have brought the two of us together to talk about how we could help each other move forward. It's not that Beril doesn't want to help the Russell Center. And it's not that I don't want to work with Beril at Georgia Tech because I'm the Russell Center. It's literally because she's not even on my radar. I'm not even thinking about her. And before this call, she wasn't even thinking about me.
Well, actually, that's not quite correct. Because we did together. You and I didn't talk, but you provided a support letter for the NSF Regional Innovation Engine for sustainability ecosystem that we did earlier. Now, we didn't get funded.
Beril, I was making a great point. You just blew it up.
But you and I did not connect, and I have to say that I was feeling a little awkward about like picking up the phone and saying, "Hey," because I'm sure you get a lot of calls from, well-intentioned people, and how do you know which one to take seriously? Not that you should take me seriously, but sometimes it's actually it's difficult to reach across because you don't know how whether your outreach is going to be welcome, and getting that first conversation to flow is not that. So we're both grateful that we're in these boxes.
I think Beril, you just made is critical, right? Leon, it takes a certain amount of courage. It is a certain amount of vulnerability to say that I'm going to extend my hand, and there is no guarantee that it doesn't get slapped away.
Yeah, that's right.
But nothing will happen if I don't extend my hand. And so it's proximity, it's putting people in the room, creating curated collisions. It is saying to you, to when you travel as a business school professor and you go to other conferences where they've never seen a Black business school professor, and they say, wow, that Dr. Prieto, he's really sharp. Maybe I want to have a conversation because you know what? Otherwise, I never would have heard any kind of anything from his community because I'm in my bubble. There's no real easy answer to the question you're asking, brother, but I think the simple ways that we can get beyond it is doing more things like what the two of you have brought together with Professor Beril and myself.
Yeah, stronger. There's this Georgia Climate Project that had launched a few years ago, and their alliterative thing is stronger network, stronger conversations, and I think stronger science in that particular case. But the conversations are truly important. The community building is truly important. I will also come back to the role of education, starting very early on and extending into college and increasingly beyond, because people are looking to retool. People are looking to find their space in a changing world, but they don't always know how. It does take courage. It also takes a lot of time. People are running around busy trying to whatever, meet deadlines and get their kids to soccer and do everything that they need to do, making space to create new connections. Some of us need to dedicate our time to creating curated spaces and maybe bite-sized educational opportunities to make that easier for people.
Wow. There were
That
so many
would
gems.
definitely be helpful. And Mhm.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
Well, I noticed we're running out of time.
yes, yes.
So I wanted to wrap up with a final question, a two-part question for you, Jay. And that's, what role do you think that policies or initiatives at the local or federal level, what role do they have to play in encouraging minority-owned businesses and their success? And then finally, if you can share some success stories of minority-owned businesses. So role of local and federal government, and then success stories.
That one's a tough one, Professor Phipps. It's politicians focused on serving the people versus getting reelected is a very controversial statement, but it's real. That we have an example in Atlanta of Maynard Jackson, who came in as our first Black mayor. And he took the incredible risk of saying that you're not going to have, 30+% of the contracts awarded in the city have to go to Black people. And from his courage, he literally created more Black millionaires in the South than any other mayor in history. But he paid a cost. When he left his office, he couldn't find a job in Atlanta. He had to go to Chicago to get work. But he stood on that principle and demanded it. And when he had the authority and the power to do it from the mayor's seat, he took full advantage and literally led with policy that demanded inclusivity, especially in a city that had a growing demographic of growing Black population. It just was illogical to see anything else happen. I think that we've come away from that level of political courage that allows someone to say that re-election be damned, politics to the side. Let's look at policies that are equitable, and good governance should be the win, not just the celebration and the vote count, but good governance that actually helps the people move forward. It's a black eye that those stats that we talked about. How do we get into a position where we're the worst city in the country for income inequality and the worst city in the country for economic immobility? Right. We've got to do better. And some of that is policy driven, but also that takes a tremendous amount of courage to say that I'm going to do what may be unpopular. Right. I may ruffle some feathers. I will step on some toes, but it's necessary to see change happen. Mm-hmm. It's very rare that we see that kind of courage and capital and power in the same room, speaking the same language. But I will say, going to the second part of your question, I've seen it happen. We have an incredible story that one of our companies that we support, one of our founding 100 companies, got the horrible phone call right at the start of COVID-19 and the pandemic when everything was shutting down, that overnight, 80% of their business was evaporated with one phone call. They were going out of business. However, they were one of our stakeholders. They came to us. We had already done the work to make sure that they were ready to do business at the next level. Turns out a Fortune 50 company. We had insight that they were doing a massive construction project south of I-20. And literally that company within 6 months was able to secure a contract that 4x'd what they had lost before. And now that company is continuing to grow. But what it took was just the access to the relationships and the networks. It wasn't that they changed who they were as a company. They just didn't have the access before. And as a small Black-owned general contractor, it usually takes 6 to 8 years of development of relationships within a Fortune 50 before you're able to see any revenue come from that, and certainly a contract. We were able to do that in 6 months. A company that was ready, that had all the capacity, and was now able to take on a bigger opportunity. All they needed was a little bit of access. And at that point, their company took off. And hopefully the kind of contract level that will generationally shift that company for the next 10, 20 years. That happened because of a phone call. That happened because of a relationship. But that also happened because of the courage to say that these people deserve a shot. And this isn't charity. They are a company that is ready to do business at the next level. And that company had the courage to say, you're right. And we're not going to treat it like charity. We're going to treat it as, if we're going to be building in Atlanta, we need to make sure that the people that are building with us look like the city of Atlanta.
Can I jump in?
That's an excellent example. Thank you.
And
Of
add
course.
to that, Jay talked about, the role of the mayor and the local government. And I want to also acknowledge that others also need to lead by example. I will put Georgia Tech as one of the institutions that is really called on to lead by example. We are an anchor institution. What we do with our campus, what we do with our hiring practices, what we do with our procurement practices, what we do with our stormwater management, neighborhood development, all of that is very impactful. And I am proud that, in the last few years, building on, past good work that was done, the notion of lead by example is now in the Georgia Tech strategic plan. And we have a new team, the VP of Infrastructure and Sustainability, the Office of Sustainability, and other people in strategic places across the research and government relations pieces of Georgia Tech that are very actively, using the language of anchor institution, because how we go about our business and how we create opportunity matters. And we look to organizations like RISE not only for partnership, but also for holding us accountable and helping us set targets that are meaningful for the community. So that's another area I believe that we could work more closely together, not just with RISE, but other similar organizations.
Well, this has been a powerful conversation, so
Thank you.
So Beril, Jay, thank you so much, and thanks to the Business Ecosystem Alliance and Thinkers50 for providing this platform, for bringing us together to have this meaningful conversation. And I believe other cities could learn from some of these gems that were talked about today to help develop a more sustainable ecosystem wherever you are in this world. So
thank you for
again.
your leadership, Leon and Simone.
Thank you.
Thank you for creating
the radical indifference. I'll be talking to you soon, Beril.
Same here. Thank you. I look forward to it.
Wonderful. Bye, everyone.